Every morning at precisely 7:15, through the rain-streaked windows of the Morning Glory Diner, a little girl would appear. She moved like a whisper, a ghost in a worn blue coat, always taking the same cracked vinyl booth in the corner. She never spoke a word. For months, waitress Clara Jensen's only job was to bring her a hot chocolate and a croissant, a silent ritual in the heart of Seattle. Clara didn't know the girl's name, her story, or the profound emptiness in her eyes. She only knew that a simple kindness, an extra marshmallow, a doodle on a napkin, seemed to be a lifeline. Little did she know that lifeline was attached to a world of unimaginable wealth, heartbreak, and a secret that was about to walk through the diner door with 4 bodyguards and change her life forever. The bell above the door of the Morning Glory Diner was a liar. It didn't jingle. It gave a weary metallic sigh, as if exhausted by the endless parade of Seattle's damp and hurried populace. For Clara Jensen, that sound was the metronome of her life. It marked the start of rushes, the lulls between them, and the arrival of her most enigmatic customer. Clara was an artist trapped in a waitress's uniform. Her dreams were rendered in oil and acrylic, but her reality smelled of burnt coffee and bacon grease. Her small apartment was crammed with canvases she couldn't afford to frame, each one a testament to a passion that paid in satisfaction but not in rent. The diner, with its faded checkered floors and the constant hum of the neon sign, was her patron. It funded her art, one tipped dollar at a time. Her life was a routine of balancing plates and pallets, but one piece of that routine had become sacred. At 7:15 a.m., just as the early morning rush began to thin, the little girl would arrive. She couldn't have been more than 7 or 8 years old, with hair the color of straw and eyes the color of a stormy sea. She would slide into booth 4, the one with the tear in the vinyl that looked like a winking eye, and place a worn, leather-bound sketchbook on the table. The first time she came in, Clara had approached with her standard cheerful greeting. "Morning, sunshine. What can I get for you?" The girl had flinched, pulling her shoulders in so tightly she seemed to shrink. She didn't look up, just pointed a small, trembling finger at the menu, at the picture of a hot chocolate. Clara's smile softened. "Hot chocolate it is," she'd said gently. "And how about a croissant? They're fresh out of the oven." A tiny, almost imperceptible nod was her only answer. And so the ritual began. Every single day, Monday through Friday, 7:15 a.m., the girl would slip in, silent as a shadow. Clara would have the order ready. A steaming mug of hot chocolate, always with 2 extra marshmallows on top, and a flaky, buttery croissant on a small plate. She'd place it on the table without a word, just a warm, lingering smile. The girl would give that same tiny nod, then open her sketchbook and begin to draw, her pencil moving with a quiet intensity that fascinated Clara. Clara named her Lily in her mind, for her fragility and pale complexion. She wondered endlessly about her. Where were her parents? A nanny or driver would drop her off from a discreet black town car that never lingered, and precisely at 8:15 a.m., the same car would return to pick her up. No one ever came inside with her. An hour of solitude for a child who seemed to carry the weight of the world. Clara started leaving little things for her. One day it was a napkin with a cartoon sun doodled on it. The next she left a single perfect daisy in a small glass of water by the salt shaker. She never knew if Lily even noticed until one Tuesday morning. After Lily had left, as Clara was clearing the table, she found the doodled napkin tucked carefully into the pages of the sketchbook, which had been left slightly ajar. Her heart did a little flip. The connection, fragile as it was real. Clara felt a fierce, protective instinct swell within her. This small, silent child had carved out a space in her world. She was no longer just a customer. She was a mystery Clara was desperate to solve, a quiet soul she felt compelled to nurture. The diner wasn't just a job anymore. It was a sanctuary for them both. Clara was just pouring coffee for a regular when the weary sigh of the doorbell was replaced by a sudden, jarring silence. A chill swept through the warm diner, and every head turned. The ritual was about to be broken. The weeks bled into months, and the silent bond between Clara and Lily deepened. The change was subtle, a slow thaw after a long winter. It started with Lily's eyes. Instead of being fixed on her sketchbook or the tabletop, They would occasionally lift and meet Clara's across the bustling diner. A fleeting moment of contact, but it was enough. Then came the first smile. Clara had brought the hot chocolate, and on a whim, she had used a bit of syrup to draw a smiley face in the foam. She set it down, tapped the rim of the mug, and winked. Lily looked down, and for a split second, the corners of her mouth turned upwards in a shy, breathtaking curve. It vanished as quickly as it came, but Clara's spirit soared for the rest of her shift. It felt like a bigger victory than finishing her most ambitious painting. The sketchbook remained Lily's sacred world, but she began hesitantly to share it. One morning, after finishing her drawing, she turned the book around on the table before she left. On the page was a remarkably detailed sketch of Clara's hand, the one with the small daub of ultramarine blue paint permanently stained near the knuckle, holding a coffee pot. Below it, she had drawn the smiley face from the hot chocolate. Clara felt a lump form in her throat. She looked up just as Lily was sliding out of the booth. Their eyes met, and this time, Lily held her gaze. It was a look of gratitude, of trust, a silent thank you. This new development did not go unnoticed. Marge, the diner's owner and head cook, a woman whose heart was softer than her perpetually gruff exterior, watched from behind the pass-through. "You've got away with that one, Clara," she said one afternoon, wiping her hands on her apron. "Never seen her look at anyone before." "She just needs someone to be patient," Clara replied, her voice filled with an affection that surprised even herself. "Just be careful," Marge warned, her brow furrowed. "A kid like that, dropped off in a fancy car every day alone? There's a story there, and stories like that often have sharp edges." Clara knew Marge was right, but she couldn't help it. She was invested. She started bringing in small gifts, not toys, but things an artist would appreciate. A set of colored pencils she'd found on sale, a special charcoal stick, a small tin of watercolors. Each gift was left on the table, and the next day a drawing made with the new materials would be waiting for her. Lily drew the diner's neon sign in vibrant color, the salt and pepper shakers in dramatic charcoal, a watercolored rendition of the rain-streaked window. She was communicating, not with her voice, but through her art. It was a language Clara understood perfectly. Their silent conversations were held on paper, a bridge of graphite and pigment built across an ocean of silence. The breakthrough, when it came, was as small and quiet as Lily herself. It was a Thursday. A loud crash from the kitchen, a busboy dropping a tray of dishes, sent a shockwave through the diner. Lily jumped, her body going rigid. Her eyes widened with a primal fear, and a small choke sound escaped her lips. It was the first noise Clara had ever heard her make. Without thinking, Clara rushed to the booth and knelt beside her. Hey, it's okay," she whispered, keeping a respectful distance, not wanting to touch her without permission. "It was just some dishes. No one's hurt. Just a loud noise." Lily was trembling, her knuckles white where she gripped her sketchbook. She looked at Clara, her eyes swimming with a terror that seemed far too vast for such a small child. "It's okay," Clara repeated softly. "You're safe here." Slowly, very slowly, Lily reached out a trembling hand and laid it on Clara's arm. The touch was feather-light, a question and a statement all at once. It said, "Are you sure?" It said, "Thank you for being here." Clara covered Lily's small hand with her own. "I've got you," she murmured. The trembling subsided. Lily withdrew her hand, took a deep, shuddering breath, and then did something extraordinary. She picked up her pencil, and on a fresh page in her sketchbook, she wrote a single word. In shaky, childish script, it spelled out, Clara. She had learned her name. It was more intimate than any spoken word. It was an acknowledgement, a claiming of their connection. Clara felt tears well in her eyes. The silence had cracked, and through that tiny fissure, a brilliant light was beginning to shine. She beamed at the little girl, a smile so full of joy and relief it made her own cheeks ache. In that moment, she felt like she could protect this child from anything. She had no idea that the very thing Lily needed protection from was about to walk through the door. The morning had started like any other. The Seattle sky was its usual shade of bruised pewter, and a fine mist was slicking the streets. Inside the Morning Glory diner, the air was warm and filled with the comforting symphony of clattering cutlery and low conversation. Lily was in her booth, sketching with a new set of pastel chalks Clara had given her, a faint dusting of pink and blue on her fingertips. Clara was refilling a coffee cup for Mr. Henderson, a retired postal worker, when the world seemed to hold its breath. It wasn't the bell. The door was pushed open with such force that it slammed against its stopper, the weary sigh replaced by a sharp, percussive bang. Every sound in the diner ceased. Forks hovered halfway to mouths. Conversations died in mid-sentence. Framed in the doorway stood a man who didn't belong. He was tall and severe, dressed in a bespoke navy blue suit that probably cost more than Clara made in 6 months. His face was all sharp angles and disciplined control, but his eyes, a startlingly cold gray, swept the room with an unnerving intensity. They held a deep, profound exhaustion, overshadowed by a palpable aura of power. He was flanked by 2 men on the outside of the door, and followed by 2 more who stepped inside with him. They were mountains in tailored black suits, with earpieces and impassive expressions that broadcasted one clear message: do not approach. The diner, a haven of simple, working-class comfort, was suddenly suffocating under the weight of immense wealth and authority. The lead man's gaze landed on booth 4, on Lily. His controlled expression tightened, a flicker of something, pain, anger, regret, crossing his features before being locked down again. He started forward, his movements precise and purposeful, his expensive leather shoes making no sound on the linoleum floor. Clara's heart hammered against her ribs. Instinct took over. She placed the coffee pot down and moved to intercept him, her body automatically positioning itself between the imposing man and Lily's booth. "Excuse me, sir," she said, her voice steadier than she felt. "Can I help you?" The man stopped, his cold gray eyes fixing on her. It was like being examined under a microscope. He was assessing her, cataloging her, the faded apron, the paint stain on her hand, the determined set of her jaw. "I'm here for my daughter," he said. His voice was a low, resonant baritone, clipped and devoid of warmth. Clara glanced back at Lily. The little girl had frozen, her pastel chalk held motionless above the paper. All the light and life that had begun to bloom in her face had vanished, replaced by that familiar, hollow emptiness. She was staring at the man, her expression unreadable. "Your daughter?" Clara asked, turning back to him, her protective instincts flaring. "She's never mentioned a father." It was a foolish thing to say. Lily had never mentioned anything, but she felt a need to challenge him, to question his right to storm in and shatter their fragile peace. A muscle ticked in the man's jaw. "Her name is Lillian Allister. I am Julian Allister. Now if you'll step aside." The name hit the diner like a thunderclap. Julian Allister. Even in a city of tech giants, his name was legend. The reclusive, genius CEO of Allister Dynamics, a global tech empire. A man whose net worth had more zeros than Clara could comprehend. A man whose wife, Eleanor Allister, a celebrated philanthropist and artist, had tragically died in a car accident just over a year ago. Suddenly, it all clicked into place. The silence, the sadness, the black car, the sketchbook. Lillian, was the daughter of a billionaire, and the quiet girl Clara had been nurturing was the grieving child of a tragedy that had been front-page news. Julian Allister took another step forward, but Clara held her ground. "You can't just walk in here like this," she said, her voice low and fierce. "You're scaring her." His eyes narrowed. "What I am doing," he said, his voice dropping to a dangerous whisper, "is removing my daughter from a situation I no longer approve of. Her security team informed me she was forming an attachment. I came to see for myself." His gaze flickered past Clara to the gifts on the table. The pencils, the watercolors. It seems they were right. From his perspective, Clara saw it with a sickening lurch. He didn't see kindness. He saw an opportunist, a common waitress cozying up to a billionaire's vulnerable child. He saw a threat. "Lily," he said, his voice now taking on a tone of command. "Get your things, we're leaving." Lily didn't move. Her eyes were wide, fixed on Clara. It was a plea. "Don't let him take me away." Clara's resolve hardened. This wasn't about money or status. It was about a terrified little girl. "I think you should talk to her, not at her," Clara said, her voice ringing with a conviction she didn't know she possessed. "She's a person, not a possession you can just collect." The air crackled with tension. Julian Allister stared at her, his expression a mask of cold fury. The four bodyguards shifted, their presence a looming promise of physical force. The patrons of the Morning Glory Diner watched in stunned silence. The quiet little ritual in Booth 4 had just erupted into a confrontation of two worlds, and Clara, with nothing but a coffee-stained apron and a fierce love for a silent child, was standing directly at the epicenter of the storm. Julian Allister looked at Clara as if she were a piece of code that had failed to execute properly. His entire life was built on control, on assets and liabilities, on problems that could be solved with enough capital or pressure. This waitress, with her defiant eyes and cheap uniform, was an anomaly he couldn't process. "I will not be lectured on parenting by a waitress," he said, the words precise and cutting. He reached into the inner pocket of his suit jacket and produced a sleek black leather checkbook and a pen that looked more expensive than Clara's car. He uncapped it with a decisive click. "What is it you want?" he asked, his tone transactional. "Is this about money? I'm sure we can come to an arrangement. Name your price for the kindness you've shown my daughter. I'll write you a check, and this association will end. Today." The offer hung in the air, thick and poisonous. It was a dismissal, a reduction of every gentle smile, every extra marshmallow, every shared piece of art, into a simple, grubby transaction. Clara felt a hot flush of anger and humiliation rise in her chest. It wasn't just an insult to her. It was a desecration of the pure, simple connection she had built with Lily. She looked from the blank check in his hand to Lily, who was watching the exchange with wide, terrified eyes. The little girl's hands were clenched so tightly around her sketchbook that her knuckles were white. She looked like she was about to shatter. That was all Clara needed to see. "You think you can buy my silence?" Clara's voice was low, but it carried across the silent diner. "You think you can walk in here, wave your money around, and erase the only stability this little girl has felt in months? That check isn't an offer, it's an insult." She took a step closer, lowering her voice so only he could hear. "Your daughter isn't an association, Mr. Allister. She's a grieving child who hasn't spoken a word since her mother died. She comes here every morning because it's safe, because no one pushes her, because for 1 hour she can just be. And you want to put a price on that? You want to buy her sanctuary?" Julian's face, which had been a mask of cold authority, faltered. The mention of his wife was a clear, direct hit. The anger in his eyes was momentarily eclipsed by a raw, unguarded pain. He had built walls of wealth and power around his grief, and this stranger had just walked right through them. He recovered quickly, his expression hardening once more. "You know nothing about my family." "I know what I see," Clara shot back. "I see a little girl who learned my name by writing it, because she couldn't speak it. I see a little girl who smiled for the first time in God knows how long because of a silly drawing in her hot chocolate. That's not for sale, not for any price." She looked pointedly at the checkbook. "Put it away. You're embarrassing yourself, and you're terrifying your daughter." For a long, tense moment, they were locked in a stalemate. The billionaire, accustomed to the world bending to his will, and the waitress, who had nothing to lose and everything to fight for. The four bodyguards stood like statues, waiting for a command that didn't come. Finally, with a sharp, frustrated sigh, Julian Allister snapped the checkbook shut and slid it back into his pocket. The gesture was a retreat, however small. "Lillian," he said, his voice strained, all the booming authority gone. He looked at his daughter, truly looked at her, and seemed to finally see the fear in her eyes. "The car is outside." He turned and strode toward the door without another word to Clara. Two of the bodyguards followed him out. The other two remained, their presence a silent, imposing pressure. One of them, a man with a kinder face than the others, stepped forward. "Ma'am," he said respectfully to Clara, "we'll escort her." Lily slowly, reluctantly began to gather her things. Her movements were stiff and robotic. She packed her pastels and her special pencils into her bag. Lastly, she picked up her sketchbook. As she slid out of the booth, she clutched it to her chest like a shield. She walked toward the door, but just before she reached it, she stopped and turned back. Her stormy eyes found Clara's across the room. She lifted one small hand and for the first time waved. It was a tiny, hesitant gesture, but it was filled with a world of unspoken meaning. It was goodbye. It was thank you. It was I'm sorry. Then she was gone. Clara stood rooted to the spot, her heart aching with a profound sense of loss. The diner slowly came back to life, the patrons beginning to whisper amongst themselves. Marge appeared at her side, placing a comforting hand on her shoulder. "You did the right thing, kid," she said gruffly. Clara could only nod, watching the black town car pull away from the curb and disappear into the gray Seattle morning. She had stood up to a titan and protected a child, but in doing so, she knew she had likely lost her little friend forever. The silence in booth 4 had never felt so loud. Julian Allister sat in the back of his soundproofed Maybach, the city of Seattle a blur of muted colors through the tinted window. Beside him, Lily was a statue of misery, staring blankly at the sketchbook in her lap. The silence in the car was heavier than a physical weight. He had won the battle, but the victory felt hollow, tasting of ash. Clara's words echoed in his mind. "You're terrifying your daughter. I see a grieving child who hasn't spoken a word since her mother died." He had spent the last year trying to manage his daughter's grief like a corporate crisis. He'd hired the best child psychologists, the most exclusive tutors, the kindest nannies. He had provided her with every material comfort imaginable. He had built a fortress of structured, professional care around her. And yet, a waitress in a cheap diner, with a doodled napkin and some extra marshmallows, had accomplished what his entire fortune could not. She had made his daughter smile. The thought was infuriating and deeply unsettling. His first instinct, the one honed in boardrooms and hostile takeovers, was to neutralize the threat. The moment he returned to his penthouse office overlooking Puget Sound, he summoned his head of security, a formidable man named David Chen. "The waitress," Julian began, pacing in front of the floor-to-ceiling windows. "Clara Jensen. I want to know everything. Financials, associates, education, social media, everything. I want to know her angle." "Sir," David replied, his tone even, "our preliminary check showed nothing of concern. She's a student at the Cornish College of the Arts, part-time, working at the diner to cover her tuition and loans. No criminal record, no concerning affiliations. By all accounts, she just seems to be a nice person." "Nobody is just a nice person when my daughter's involved," Julian snapped. "Dig deeper. Everyone has a price, a weakness. Find it." For the next 48 hours, Julian threw himself into his work, trying to drown out the memory of Clara's accusing eyes and Lily's terrified face. But the silence in his sprawling, sterile apartment was deafening. Lily had retreated further into herself than ever before. She wouldn't eat. She wouldn't leave her room. She wouldn't even open her sketchbook. The fortress he had built was now her prison. On the third day, David Chen entered his office and placed a tablet on his desk. "Sir, we finished the comprehensive background check on Miss Jensen." "And," Julian asked, not looking up from his monitor, "leverage?" "No, sir. Nothing like that," David said quietly. "But I think there's something you need to see." Julian finally turned his attention to the tablet. The screen showed a feed from a discreet security camera his team had placed across from the diner. The footage was time-stamped from that morning. 7:15 a.m. He watched as Clara, on her break, went and sat in booth 4. Lily's booth. She just sat there nursing a cup of coffee, staring at the empty seat across from her. Her expression was one of profound sadness. She wasn't an opportunist looking for her next score. She was a friend who missed her friend. David swiped the screen. The next file was a portfolio of Clara's artwork, pulled from her college website. Julian's breath caught in his throat. The paintings were stunning, vibrant, emotional, full of life. They were landscapes mostly, but they captured not just the look of a place, but the feel of it. They reminded him, with a painful jolt, of his late wife, Eleanor. Eleanor had been a painter before she'd met him, a brilliant one. It was a passion she had slowly set aside as the demands of being Mrs. Julian Allister and raising a family took over. He had told her she could have all the studios and supplies she wanted, but he had never truly understood that what she needed wasn't resources, but time and freedom, the very things his world had taken from her. There's one more thing, sir, David said, his voice gentle. He swiped again. It was an old news article, a local human interest piece from years ago. The headline read, "Local Diner, a Haven for Aspiring Artists." The feature was about the Morning Glory Diner and its history of supporting local creatives. Julian scanned the article, and then he saw it. A black and white photograph of a young woman, her face bright with optimism, sketching in one of the diner's booths. She was sitting in booth 4. The caption underneath read, "Eleanor Vance, a promising local painter, finds inspiration over coffee." Eleanor Vance, his wife's maiden name. The world tilted on its axis. It wasn't just any diner. It was her diner. The place she used to go to escape, to dream. Long before he had entered her life, he had never known. In his grief, he had avoided all of her old things, all the places that held her memories, believing it was the only way to move forward. He had tried to shield Lily from the pain, but in doing so, he had cut her off from her mother entirely. Lily hadn't just found a diner, and she hadn't just found a kind waitress who was also an artist. Somehow, through some primal, childish instinct, his silent, grieving daughter had found her mother's ghost. She had been searching for a memory, a connection to the one person she missed most in the world. And he, in his blind arrogance, had tried to buy it, to shut it down, to take it away from her. The weight of his failure crashed down on him. He wasn't protecting his daughter. He had been the storm she needed protection from all along. He looked at David, his composure finally cracking. "Cancel my afternoon," he said, his voice hoarse. "I have to go back." The bell on the door of the Morning Glory Diner gave its weary sigh. This time it announced the arrival of a single man. Julian Allister walked in, not with the overwhelming force of a corporate raider, but with the hesitant steps of a penitent. He was alone. No bodyguards, no entourage. He wore simple gray trousers and a cashmere sweater, the billionaire armor stripped away, leaving only the man, the grieving husband, the failing father. The mid-afternoon lull had settled over the diner. Clara was wiping down the counter, her movements listless. When she saw him, her body tensed. She placed the rag down, her expression a mixture of wariness and defiance. "If you're here to try again," she started, her voice firm. "No," he interrupted, his voice quiet. He stopped a few feet away, a chasm of linoleum and misunderstanding between them. "I'm here to apologize." The words were so unexpected that Clara was momentarily speechless. "What I did," he continued, the words seeming to cost him a great deal, "was inexcusable. I was arrogant and I was wrong. You weren't trying to exploit my daughter. You were helping her. And I punished you both for it." He looked towards booth 4, his eyes filled with a sadness so profound it seemed to age him before her eyes. "I didn't know," he said, his voice barely a whisper. "About this place." Clara's brow furrowed in confusion. "Know what?" Instead of answering, he held up a familiar leather-bound object. Lily's sketchbook. "She wouldn't show it to me, not until last night. I think she wants you to see it." He walked over to booth 4 and placed the sketchbook on the table, opening it to the last filled page. Clara followed, her curiosity overriding her caution. She looked down at the page. It was a drawing done in the soft pastel she had given Lily. It depicted 2 women sitting across from each other in this very booth. One was clearly Clara, with her kind smile and the paint stain on her hand. The other woman was rendered with an almost ethereal quality. She had Lily's straw-colored hair and a gentle, loving expression. She was also an artist, a sketchbook open in front of her. In the drawing, the woman who was not Clara was handing a crayon to Lily, who was just a toddler in the image. It was a memory, a beautiful, heartbreaking memory of her mother. "Her name was Eleanor," Julian said, his voice thick with emotion. "My wife, she was a painter, like you." He explained everything. How this diner had been Eleanor's secret sanctuary years ago. How he had never known. How in his grief, he had shut out every part of her past, thinking it was the only way to protect himself and his daughter from the pain. "Lily wasn't just running away from the silence in our home," he said, his gaze fixed on the drawing. "She was running towards something, towards her mother. She must have found an old photograph or a journal. She found this place and then she found you, an artist, a kind soul sitting in her mother's favorite booth. To her, it must have felt like a miracle. Tears welled in Clara's eyes as the full picture came into focus. All the pieces clicked together. Lily's fascination with art, her instant connection to the diner, her silent, desperate need for comfort. It had never been about just the hot chocolate. It was a pilgrimage. I tried to solve her grief with money and control, Julian confessed, his voice cracking. The only tools I have. But you spoke to her in the only language she had left, the language you both share with Eleanor. Art. He finally met Clara's eyes, his own filled with a humility she never would have thought possible. I was so wrong. I was so blinded by my own pain that I couldn't see hers. You didn't just give her a safe space, Clara. You gave her back a piece of her mother. At that moment, the door sighed open again. A small figure in a blue coat stood there, holding the hand of David Chen, the kind-faced bodyguard. It was Lily. She looked from her father to Clara, her expression uncertain. Julian knelt down to her level. It's okay, sweet pea, he said softly. I'm not angry anymore. I understand. Lily walked slowly toward the booth. She looked at the open sketchbook, then at Clara. Her little face was a canvas of conflicting emotions. Clara knelt down too, creating a small, safe circle with Julian and his daughter. It's a beautiful drawing, Lily, Clara said, her voice gentle. Your mom, she was very talented, just like you. Lily looked at her father, then back at Clara. She took a small, shuddering breath, as if gathering all the courage in her tiny body. Her lips parted, and then, for the first time in over a year, she spoke. Her voice was a tiny, rusty whisper, but the words were crystal clear. She liked extra marshmallows too. The three words shattered the lingering silence, rebuilding the world in their wake. Julian let out a sob, a raw, broken sound of a heart unburdened, and he pulled his daughter into a hug, burying his face in her hair. Clara watched them, tears streaming freely down her own face. No longer a waitress or a stranger, but a vital part of this family's healing. The unspoken language had finally been translated, and it spoke of love, loss, and the miraculous, redemptive power of a simple kindness. The weeks that followed were a period of gentle, tentative reconstruction, where the cracked vinyl of Booth 4 became the unlikely setting for the piecing together of a broken family. The Morning Glory Diner, once a place of silent ritual, was now filled with the burgeoning sound of healing. The change was palpable. The air itself seemed lighter, the scent of brewing coffee mingling with a newfound sense of hope. Julian Allister, the titan of technology, became a diligent student in the art of slowing down. Most mornings he would arrive with Lily, not in the imposing Maybach, but in a far more discreet sedan driven by David Chen, who now offered a friendly nod to Marge as he held the door. Julian would shed his billionaire persona the moment he stepped inside, the severe lines of his face softening as he slid into the booth. He would order a black coffee and a copy of the Seattle Times, but the newspaper often lay untouched. His attention was solely on his daughter. He watched, captivated, as the world of color and conversation returned to Lily. He observed as Clara, with the innate patience of a true teacher, showed Lily how to create texture in a drawing by cross-hatching with a pencil, or how to mix watercolors on a paper napkin to capture the exact shade of the gray Seattle sky. In turn, Lily, with a shy confidence, would show Clara her own discoveries, how a kneaded eraser could be shaped to lift highlights from a charcoal sketch, a trick her mother had apparently taught her long ago. The whispers grew. They started as single-word answers to Clara's questions, then blossomed into short sentences directed at her father. One morning, she pointed out the window and whispered, "Mommy said clouds are the sky's daydreams." Julian's breath hitched, and he could only nod, his eyes glistening with unshed tears. He was hearing his wife's poetry again, echoed in the voice of their child. Even Marge, the diner's gruff but golden-hearted matriarch, became part of their healing circle. On the first morning Julian returned after the confrontation, he had approached the counter, pulled out a thick money clip, and tried to leave a $1,000 tip. Marge had pushed his hand back, her expression stern. "We don't do charity here, Mr. Allister," she'd said, her voice a low rumble. "You want to thank her? You keep bringing your girl, you sit in her booth, you drink our coffee, and you learn how to smile. That's payment enough." From that day on, a strange and wonderful respect formed between them. Julian started calling her Marge, and she called him Julian, forgoing the formal title he was accustomed to. He learned the names of the cooks. He listened to Clara's stories about her art classes and the absurd demands of her professors. For the first time since Eleanor's death, Julian was not a CEO or a recluse. He was simply a man, a father, finding his way back to the world in a humble diner that smelled of home. For Clara, this new reality felt like living in a dream she hadn't known she was having. Her life now had two distinct halves: the hours spent on her feet, slinging hash browns and refilling coffee, and the sacred hours spent in booth 4, witnessing a miracle. She felt a profound, almost dizzying joy, but it was tinged with a threat of anxiety. This felt fragile. She, a struggling art student, had stumbled into the orbit of one of the world's most powerful men. She cherished her bond with Lily and her burgeoning friendship with Julian, but a small voice in the back of her mind whispered, "What happens when they don't need the diner anymore?" One rainy Saturday, when the diner was closed, Julian called her. His voice was different on the phone, the familiar baritone less guarded. "Lily has been asking to go to the Seattle Art Museum," he said. "There's an impressionist exhibit she wants to see. And she asked if you would come with us." He paused. "I'd like that very much too." Clara's heart fluttered. This was a step outside the diner, outside their established safe zone. This was real. "I'd love that," she replied, her voice more breathless than she intended. Walking through the hushed grand halls of the museum with them felt both perfectly natural and utterly surreal. Lily was a different child here, her eyes wide with wonder, her small hand occasionally slipping into Clara's. She would point at a Degas sculpture of a dancer and talk about the movement, or stand before a Monet and describe the colors as sleepy or loud. Julian led them to a quieter wing, one with a small brass plaque that read, "The Eleanor Allister Pavilion." It was filled with modern American landscapes. He stopped in front of a large, breathtaking oil painting of a storm rolling over the San Juan Islands. The sky was a dramatic clash of deep indigo and electric violet, but on the horizon, a sliver of brilliant gold promised the return of the sun. "This was her favorite," Julian said softly, his gaze lost in the canvas. "Eleanor, she said it was a painting about hope, that no matter how dark the storm gets, the light is always there, waiting for its turn." He turned to Clara, his eyes filled with a raw vulnerability she had only glimpsed before. "She proposed to me in front of this painting, right here. She said our life together would be an adventure, full of storms and sunlight, and she wanted to see it all with me." He swallowed hard. "After she was gone, I couldn't come here. I couldn't look at it. I think I was afraid that the light she saw was gone forever." He glanced down at Lily, who was now leaning against his side, then looked back at Clara. "You and Lily, you're showing me that the light is still here. It was just waiting." In that moment, standing before a masterpiece that held so much personal history, Clara shared her own fears. She told him about the canvases stacked against her apartment walls, the constant worry about rent, the nagging doubt that her art would ever be more than a hobby. She spoke of her dream to have a studio with a big window, a space where she could paint without the smell of her dinner, cooking a few feet away. He listened, truly listened, his full attention on her. He didn't offer solutions or platitudes. He just nodded, his expression one of deep understanding. A silent promise passed between them. "I see you. I understand your world." A week later, the invitation came. It was formal, delivered by a courier. An appointment to meet Julian at his office in the Allister Dynamics Tower downtown. The request was simple: to discuss a potential project. The day of the meeting, Clara felt a nervous flutter in her stomach that her diner apron couldn't contain. She wore her nicest dress, a simple navy blue one, but she felt impossibly small as she walked into the lobby of the Allister Tower. It was a cathedral of glass and steel, a testament to ambition and power. The hushed efficiency of the place, the silent elevators gliding up to the heavens, the panoramic view from the reception area on the 80th floor. It was all designed to intimidate, to remind you of your place in the world. Julian's office was larger than her entire apartment. One entire wall was a window overlooking the city, Puget Sound, and the distant snow-capped Olympic Mountains. The view was a masterpiece in itself, but he wasn't sitting behind the massive, imposing desk. He was standing by a set of easels, draped in cloth, near a comfortable seating area. Lily was there too, sitting on a plush sofa, quietly reading a book, a reassuring presence in the intimidating space. "Clara, thank you for coming," Julian said, his smile genuine as he gestured for her to sit. "I wanted to talk to you here because what I have to propose is bigger than a booth at the diner." He walked over to the first easel and pulled away the cloth. It was a portrait, a stunning, vibrant painting of a woman with straw-colored hair and an infectious, joyful smile. "Eleanor, my wife," he said, his voice thick with reverence, "believed that art was not a luxury, but a necessity, a way of processing the world, of finding beauty in the chaos. Before we met, she was you, Clara. Talented, driven, but struggling. She always dreamed of creating a way to lift up other artists, to give them the one thing that wealth had ironically taken from her: the freedom to create without compromise, without the pressure of rent or bills." He unveiled the second easel. It held a large presentation board. On it was a beautifully designed logo, elegant typography spelling out a title: the Eleanor Allister Foundation for the Arts. Below it was a mission statement: to provide sanctuary and support for emerging artists, empowering them to build a life dedicated to their craft. "I am officially launching it," he said, his voice ringing with passion. "It will be endowed with enough capital to run for the next 100 years. It will offer grants, studio spaces, mentorships, everything an artist needs to thrive." He turned to face her directly, his expression serious. "The foundation needs its first recipient, its flagship artist. I want that to be you, Clara. I am offering you the first Eleanor grant. It's a full, unconditional grant, enough to pay off every cent of your debt, secure a proper studio, cover all your supplies, and provide you with a generous living stipend for the next 5 years. No strings. Your only obligation would be to paint, to create, to follow your dream with everything you have." Clara was breathless. The words washed over her, a tidal wave of impossibility. 5 years, a studio, no debt. It was the answer to every prayer she had ever whispered into the lonely quiet of her apartment. It was everything. "Julian, I don't know what to say," she stammered, her mind reeling. "Wait," he said, holding up a hand. "There's more." His gaze intensified. "An endowment of this size needs a director. It needs a heart. It needs someone who understands the soul of an artist, not the bottom line of a balance sheet. I can hire a dozen business managers to handle the logistics, but I can't hire the vision. I need someone who knows what it feels like to choose between buying a tube of cadmium yellow or paying the electric bill. Someone who understands that a safe space can be as simple as a quiet corner booth. I want you to run it, Clara. I want you to be the foundation's first executive director." The room tilted. Director? Her? The absurdity of it was overwhelming. "Julian, that's insane," she finally managed, shaking her head. "I'm a waitress. I'm a painter. I don't have an MBA. I don't know the first thing about running a foundation. I'm not qualified." The imposter syndrome she had kept at bay for weeks flooded in, a cold, drowning tide. "I would fail. I would fail you, and I would fail her memory." "No," he said, his voice cutting through her panic, firm but kind. "You're the only person who is qualified. Do you think a business degree is what brought my daughter back? You didn't see an heiress to a fortune. You saw a sad little girl who needed a friend. You didn't leverage her for personal gain. You offered her kindness with no expectation of reward. You stood up to me when I was at my worst because it was the right thing to do. That integrity, Clara, that empathy, that is more valuable to this foundation than any degree. You are its heart. I can build the body around you." Her head was spinning. It was too much, too fast. She looked around the opulent office, at the impossible view, and felt like an intruder who was about to be found out. She was afraid to leave the familiar comfort of the diner, afraid of the crushing weight of his expectations, afraid of failing the legacy of the woman in the portrait. As if sensing her hesitation, Lily put down her book. She slid off the sofa and walked over to a small table where her own sketchbook lay. She picked it up, walked over to Clara, and held it out. Clara took it, her hands trembling slightly. She opened it to the bookmarked page. It was a new drawing, done in the colored pencils she had given Lily. It depicted the three of them, standing not in the diner, but on a hill, looking at a sunrise. They weren't just standing next to each other. Julian had his hand on Lily's shoulder, and Lily's hand was holding Clara's. It was a picture of a family. Below it, in Lily's careful, clear script, were 4 words: our new canvas, together. Looking at that simple, powerful drawing, all of Clara's fear dissolved, replaced by a profound sense of clarity. This wasn't a job offer, it wasn't charity, it was an invitation to be part of something beautiful, to build something from the ashes of grief. It was a chance to honor Eleanor, to nurture Lily, and to finally, fully, become the artist she was always meant to be. This wasn't the end of her story with them, it was the true beginning. She looked up from the drawing to Lily's hopeful face, and then to Julian's patient, waiting eyes. A radiant, tearful smile spread across her face. "Yes," she said, her voice clear and strong, ringing with a conviction that filled the vast, silent office. "Yes, Julian, I would be honored." And so, a simple act of kindness in a humble diner, an extra marshmallow, a patient smile, unraveled a story of profound grief and unlocked a future no one could have predicted. It reminds us that you never truly know the battles the people around you are fighting, and that the quietest souls often have the loudest stories to tell. The story of Clara, Lily, and Julian isn't just about wealth or tragedy. It's about the powerful, healing language of human connection, a language that speaks louder than words and is more valuable than any fortune. It proves that sometimes the greatest changes in our lives don't come from grand gestures, but from the small, consistent acts of seeing someone for who they truly are. If this story moved you, please take a moment to hit the like button and share it with someone who might need a reminder of the power of kindness. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more real-life stories that touch the heart, and we'd love to hear from you in the comments below. Have you ever witnessed a small act of kindness that had a huge, unexpected impact? Tell us your story. Thank you for listening.